The galaxy was vast, filled with countless civilizations, each more advanced than the last. Among them, humans were often spoken of in the same tone used for nursery tales. The stories of their bravery and cunning were considered exaggerations at best, childish myths at worst. To most, humans were fragile, emotional, and primitive, a species best observed and left alone. Dravana, an analyst from the Zelari Council, had spent centuries studying interstellar warfare. Her species had long abandoned emotion in favor of logic, precision, and efficiency. Wars were recorded, studied, and predicted down to the finest decimal. Soldiers followed orders with perfect discipline, and battles ended quickly, leaving no room for heroics or mistakes. When Dravana first encountered reports of human warriors, she laughed. She laughed aloud in the observation deck of her command station as she scrolled through the centuries-old records. "Humans, unstoppable," she murmured, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Unbreakable. They can barely survive a single skirmish, and you call this legendary." The tales she read were dramatic and colorful. Humans had supposedly turned the tide of battles with mere numbers, clever tricks, and unshakable will. One account described a small human squad holding off an entire alien fleet until reinforcements arrived. Another told of a human commander rallying demoralized troops with nothing but a speech and a glance. Dravana shook her head. "Stories meant for children," she muttered, tapping the console. "Fables that make weak creatures seem strong." Yet curiosity gnawed at her. Officially, humans were classified as a minor species. Their technology lagged behind, their fleets were small, and their soldiers were undertrained compared to the galaxy's advanced militaries. But still, something about the stories lingered in her mind. The opportunity to witness humans in action arrived sooner than she expected. A joint military exercise was announced. A coalition of advanced species would work alongside human units to simulate a battle on a newly colonized planet. Dravana's council assigned her to observe one human squad, the so-called Elite Ground Unit. Her orders were simple: record data, analyze tactics, and write a final report confirming the humans' weaknesses. As her observation pod entered orbit above the exercise zone, Dravana felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. She expected chaos, fear, and disorganization, but what she saw instead was strange. The humans moved calmly. They laughed quietly among themselves, checking equipment, adjusting armor, and sharing small jokes. Their movements were casual, almost relaxed but precise. Every soldier knew their position, yet there was no rigid stiffness, no robotic repetition. They seemed human. Her eyes focused on one warrior in particular. He was neither the largest nor the fastest, but there was something in the way he carried himself that caught her attention. He moved with quiet confidence, scanning the environment, adjusting his gear without hesitation. There was no fear in his eyes, only focus. Dravana raised an eyebrow. "Surely this is just luck," she muttered. "The first stage of preparation. Wait until the battle begins and they will crumble." The humans were about to face a real test sooner than anyone expected. Sensors suddenly picked up unusual readings. The terrain, carefully mapped by the coalition, showed signs of unexpected movement. Alien scouts reported faint signals from an unknown faction. Before the humans could be fully briefed, the first wave of enemy drones attacked. The coalition forces panicked. The advanced species scrambled, relying on automated defenses, shielding technology, and complex strategies. But the humans, Dravana's humans, remained calm. They didn't charge blindly or hide in fear. They observed, adapted, and moved with a fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. The human warrior she had been watching stepped forward. He didn't shout orders. He didn't hesitate. With a few hand signals, his squad shifted positions, using natural cover, terrain, and clever positioning to counter the ambush. Drones that had been considered nearly invincible were destroyed or forced to retreat. Dravana's tentacles twitched in surprise. Her data pads, filled with centuries of tactical analysis, could not explain what she was seeing. These humans did not follow protocol. They ignored the predictions. They improvised, yet every movement seemed to work perfectly. She leaned closer to the observation viewport. The human warrior crouched behind a ridge, calculating the enemy's next move. His face was calm, but his eyes were alive with thought. Every small decision, when to fire, when to move, when to cover an ally, was executed with precision that rivaled her species' finest soldiers. The observation deck remained silent. For the first time in decades, Dravana felt a strange sensation, doubt. Perhaps the legends were not entirely false. Perhaps these humans were more than they appeared on paper. The battle escalated. Coalition forces were being cornered by the enemy, their advanced weapons surprisingly ineffective against guerrilla tactics. The humans moved through the chaos like dancers, dodging blasts, covering allies, and counterattacking in ways the Zelari had never considered. Dravana observed in awe as the human warrior saved a fellow soldier pinned under debris. He did not hesitate. Risking himself, he lifted the heavy rubble and dragged the injured soldier to safety. Then he returned to the front line without a word. She scribbled notes frantically, trying to record every detail. His bravery was undeniable, but what fascinated her most was not the heroism, it was the reasoning behind it. Every action was deliberate, calculated, and yet fueled by instinct and emotion. These humans fought not because they were fearless, but because they chose to act despite fear. Dravana's laughter had long since disappeared. Her usual analytical detachment was gone. She found herself gripping the edge of the viewport as if leaning closer could explain the impossible. The battle raged on, and the human squad continued to move with precision. Enemy drones fell one by one. Coalition soldiers, inspired by the humans, began to regain their composure. The humans had turned the tide before reinforcements could even arrive. And then, the sensors detected something worse. Signs of a massive enemy reinforcement, far larger than anyone had expected. The battle was only beginning. Dravana swallowed, her voice barely audible. "Interesting," she whispered. "So this is what a human warrior truly is." Even from orbit, she could feel the intensity of the battlefield. These humans were nothing like the weak, fragile species she had imagined. Their coordination, courage, and adaptability defied every rule she had learned in decades of studying warfare. As she prepared to continue her observation, she realized something unsettling. She had been wrong. The legends she had mocked, they might have been true. The human warrior crouched behind a ridge again, scanning the horizon. His squad followed his lead without question. There was trust in his presence, confidence in his decisions, and a strange sense of fearlessness that was not the absence of fear but mastery over it. Dravana's mind raced. What had she underestimated? Was it their instinct, their resilience? Or something deeper, something she had never seen in any species, something she could not yet name? The first part of the battle ended with an uneasy calm. The humans had held their position, the enemy had retreated temporarily, and the coalition forces were regrouping. But the real test had not yet come. Dravana leaned back in her chair, silent for the first time in centuries. She had expected chaos, panic, and the inevitable failure of the humans. Instead, she had witnessed skill, courage, and something almost extraordinary. The galaxy was about to discover that the legends of human warriors were not just stories. And Dravana, she was about to witness history being rewritten. Her tentacles tapped nervously on the observation console. "Perhaps it is time to watch more closely," she murmured. "Perhaps it is time to see what humans can really do." And so, the first chapter of the humans' true story began, not with triumph, not with glory, but with the calm was fleeting. The coalition forces were still recovering from the first ambush when the sensors lit up with alarms. Reports came in from scouts. The enemy was not retreating, they were regrouping, faster, stronger, and far more numerous than anyone had predicted. Dravana's tentacles tightened around the observation console as she watched the display. The alien fleets had trained for simulations, exercises, and controlled battles. Real combat was messy, unpredictable, and dangerous, but they had never faced an enemy like this. The human warrior she had been observing, the one she had begun to regard with cautious interest, stood at the center of his squad. His eyes scanned the chaotic battlefield, reading enemy movements with uncanny precision. Unlike the other soldiers who hesitated, adjusted shields, or waited for orders, he acted decisively. Every move seemed instinctive, yet calculated. The enemy advanced in waves, their drones swarming over the hills and valleys. Coalition forces fired in panic, their energy blasts cutting through the terrain with deadly accuracy, yet failing to stop the relentless tide. Advanced targeting systems flickered under the pressure of overwhelming numbers. Soldiers fell, panic spread, and a sense of hopelessness began to creep in. But the humans, they did not panic. The human warrior moved forward. He shouted no commands, he needed none. His squad followed his lead, splitting into groups, using natural cover and high ground, and striking with unexpected precision. Drones that had seemed invincible were destroyed one by one. The humans seemed to understand something the coalition did not. This battle was not about weapons, but about movement, observation, and courage. Dravana's eyes widened. She adjusted the zoom on her viewport, unable to tear her gaze away. "Impossible," she muttered. "No species this weak can do this." The humans advanced through the chaos, weaving between laser fire, debris, and the remains of fallen soldiers. The human warrior paused, crouched behind a ridge, and assessed the enemy again. His squad took cover automatically, moving silently as if guided by an invisible hand. Then came the first real test. A swarm of enemy drones descended from the cliffs, faster and larger than the previous wave. They fired indiscriminately, tearing through the coalition lines with terrifying speed. Alien soldiers screamed, panicked, and retreated, leaving gaps in the formation. The human warrior did not flinch. He raised his weapon and fired with deliberate aim, targeting weak points in the enemy drones. His squad covered him, following his movements with near-perfect coordination. Drones fell, one after another, as though they had no chance against his precision. Dravana's tentacles trembled slightly. She had never seen such efficiency in combat, especially from humans. Her centuries of tactical analysis offered no explanation. These creatures should have crumbled under pressure. Yet here they were, holding the line, advancing instead of retreating, and showing a composure that defied reason. "Fascinating," she whispered. "They are adapting." And adapt they did. The human warrior noticed a drone attempting to flank from the left. Without hesitation, he signaled his squad to intercept. A group of humans moved quickly, using the terrain to their advantage. They climbed rocky ridges, ducked behind boulders, and fired at the enemy from unexpected angles. The drones, designed for straightforward attacks, struggled against the unpredictable tactics. Dravana leaned closer to the viewport. Every decision, every movement was deliberate. It was not blind luck. The humans anticipated, countered, and executed in a way no algorithm, no training, and no historical record could predict. Then came the moment that changed everything. A coalition soldier, pinned beneath the rubble of a collapsed building, screamed for help. The surrounding battlefield was too dangerous for automated drones or superior alien weapons to reach him. All retreat paths were blocked. Most soldiers would have waited, calculating odds, or simply left him behind. Not the human warrior. He sprinted through open fire, weaving between energy blasts and falling debris. He reached the injured soldier, lifted him effortlessly despite his own armor and weapons, and carried him to safety. His squad provided cover fire, but he was the one who made the dangerous dash. No hesitation, no fear, just action. Dravana's eyes narrowed. Fear, yes, he feels it, but he moves anyway. She realized it then. Humans did not fight because they were fearless. They fought because they chose to fight. They faced danger, acknowledged it, and acted anyway. Fear did not paralyze them. It sharpened them, focused them, and made their decisions more precise. The battle intensified. Waves of enemy reinforcements poured in, larger and more destructive than the first. Drones that dwarfed humans in size and firepower began to tear through coalition lines. Alien soldiers, even with their superior technology, began to falter. Retreat became the only logical choice. The human warrior, however, did not retreat. He moved with uncanny awareness, predicting the enemy's attacks, coordinating his squad with hand signals, eye contact, and subtle movements. They struck at weak points, set traps, and exploited mistakes in the enemy's patterns. Dravana's mind raced. She had studied thousands of battles across countless species. She had never witnessed anything like this. Humans were supposed to be predictable, weak, and prone to panic. Yet here they were, bending chaos into a controlled symphony of tactics. Her attention was drawn to the enemy's largest threat, a massive war machine, a towering construct bristling with weapons and armor designed to crush anything in its path. Coalition forces faltered at the sight of it, their calculations predicting certain annihilation. Retreat was the only logical choice, but the human warrior did not retreat. He observed the war machine, noting its movement, its firing patterns, and its weaknesses. His squad waited, ready to follow his lead. The humans did not charge blindly. They did not hesitate. They were ready. Dravana's tentacles twitched in excitement and fear. This was no longer an exercise. This was a real battle, and the humans were rewriting the rules in front of her eyes. One by one, the human squad began executing a daring plan. They moved like shadows across the battlefield, striking at critical points on the war machine. Small explosives detonated with precision, disabling its weapons. The human warrior directed the squad silently, every movement deliberate, every decision calculated yet unpredictable. For the first time, Dravana felt a chill. She had laughed at the legends, dismissed the stories, and assumed humans were weak. She had been wrong, horribly, terrifyingly wrong. The humans were not just fighting, they were surviving. They were adapting. They were proving that fear was not a weakness, but a tool. The battlefield fell into chaos. Coalition soldiers began to follow the humans' lead, inspired by their courage. Alien soldiers who had doubted them began to fight more effectively. Even the war machine seemed uncertain, its attacks disrupted by the humans' unexpected strategies. Dravana scribbled notes frantically, unable to keep up with the brilliance of what she was seeing. Humans were not just surviving, they were leading. They were teaching even the most advanced species how to fight in the face of overwhelming odds. As the first wave of the enemy retreated, battered but not defeated, the human warrior stood atop a ridge, surveying the battlefield. His squad regrouped around him, injured but alive. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply prepared for what came next. And Dravana understood finally what the legends had meant. Humans were not heroes because they were invincible. They were heroes because they chose to stand, to act, and to protect, even when the odds were impossible. Their strength lay not in technology, numbers, or brute force, but in their will, their courage, and their ability to turn fear into action. She leaned back in her chair, silent for the first time in decades. The humans had shattered every expectation she had ever held. They had turned chaos into strategy, weakness into power, and fear into courage. Her report would need to change. The species she had dismissed as fragile and unworthy of attention was now, undeniably, a force to be reckoned with. The battle was not over. The enemy would return, larger and more determined. But Dravana no longer doubted the humans. She watched as the human warrior prepared his squad for the next wave, knowing that whatever came, these humans would face it head-on. And she, the analyst who had laughed at legends, would watch history being rewritten. One human warrior at a time, the battlefield lay in chaos. Smoke rose in thick clouds, the scent of scorched earth and burning metal filling the air. Coalition forces were scattered, their advanced technology struggling to compensate for the overwhelming enemy numbers. The humans, small, unarmored, and seemingly fragile, were the only force holding the line. At the center of it all stood the human warrior. His armor was scratched, dented, and smeared with dirt and ash. Blood streaked his face from minor wounds, and exhaustion weighed on his movements. Yet his eyes were sharp, calculating, alive. He had seen death, destruction, and despair, but he had not faltered. Dravana watched in disbelief. The humans had done what no species she had studied could achieve. They had survived against impossible odds. And now they faced the enemy's deadliest weapon, a massive war machine towering over the battlefield, bristling with guns, shields, and thrusters that churned the air with lethal force. The coalition soldiers froze. Their automated systems calculated near certain defeat. Retreat was logical, safe, and expected, but not the human warrior. He took a deep breath and assessed the machine. Its armor glinted in the sunlight, its weapons capable of obliterating anything in seconds. Any other being, any other soldier would have fled. Yet he did not. His squad looked to him for direction, their faces showing fear but trust in his presence. Dravana leaned forward, unable to look away. She had studied countless battles, thousands of strategies, and millions of combatants. She had never seen anything like this. The human warrior raised his weapon, scanning the war machine's movements, looking for weaknesses. And then he saw it, a joint in the armor, partially exposed, a spot where the machine's firing mechanism could be disrupted. But it was a near-impossible target. One wrong move and he would be crushed. One misstep and his squad could be annihilated. He didn't hesitate. "Stay with me," he said to his squad, his voice calm despite the chaos. No orders were shouted, no panicked commands, just quiet, steady words. The humans followed, moving like shadows across the battlefield, using cover terrain and instinct to close the distance. Dravana's tentacles twitched. She scribbled notes frantically, trying to record the impossible. She had laughed at human legends. She had mocked their bravery, and now she realized she had underestimated them in the most fundamental way. Humans did not act without reason. They acted through fear, through understanding, and through sheer determination. The first attempt was close. The human warrior hurled an explosive device, aiming for the joint in the war machine's armor. The device struck true, but the machine staggered only slightly. Its targeting systems adjusted instantly, locking on to him. Energy beams seared past his head, throwing him off balance. His squad shouted, retreating to cover, but he steadied himself, eyes fixed on the target. He was afraid. Dravana saw it clearly now, the tension in his shoulders, the rapid breath, the sharp glint of fear in his eyes. But fear did not stop him. He had acknowledged it, accepted it, and acted anyway. That, she realized, was what made humans unique. The war machine fired again. The human warrior dodged with precise timing, rolling behind cover. Sparks flew as energy beams struck nearby rocks, and the ground trembled under the machine's massive weight. Yet he continued, calculating each movement, predicting the enemy's actions with astonishing clarity. He signaled his squad. 2 humans moved to flank the machine from the right, another 3 provided suppressing fire, and he prepared for the next strike. Every step was deliberate, every action measured, every risk calculated. Dravana's data pads were overflowing. Her calculations could not keep up. She had studied fear in every species, how it paralyzed some, how it sharpened others, but she had never seen fear used as a weapon itself. Humans did not fight because they lacked fear. They fought because they mastered it. The human warrior climbed a small ridge, putting himself closer to the machine. His squad covered him, but the risk was immense. The machine's sensors tracked movement, its weapons capable of firing faster than any human could dodge. And yet he moved. Another explosive device in hand, he aimed for the joint again. He timed the throw perfectly, accounting for distance, trajectory, and enemy response. The device struck true. A loud explosion rocked the battlefield. Sparks flew from the war machine's armor. Its firing systems malfunctioned temporarily. The squad cheered quietly, but he didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He observed, calculated, prepared. The enemy was still deadly, and one mistake could end everything. Dravana's mind raced. She had never admired a soldier, not in centuries of observation, but she felt something approaching awe. These humans were not invincible. They were mortal, vulnerable. Yet their courage, their reasoning, and their will made them terrifyingly effective. The war machine responded, thrusters igniting, weapons firing in all directions. The human warrior ducked behind cover as one energy beam scorched the ridge. Rocks exploded around him, but he emerged unscathed, eyes fixed on his target. "Keep moving," he shouted to his squad. "Cover the flanks, don't stop." They obeyed instantly, following his lead without hesitation. The humans worked as one organism, each individual aware of the others, yet acting independently. They exploited every weakness in the enemy, using speed, agility, and ingenuity. Another strike, another explosion. The war machine staggered again, its systems failing under the humans' relentless assault, but it was not enough. It was still a deadly force, capable of destruction in moments. Retreat was still logical. Escape was still the safest choice. Yet the human warrior pressed on. Dravana realized then what she had been missing. Humans were not defined by their fear, their strength, or their numbers. They were defined by their choices. When faced with impossible odds, they chose to act. They chose to protect others, to fight, to survive, not because it was safe, but because it was necessary. The battle reached its climax. The human warrior climbed atop a broken piece of debris, his squad forming a protective circle around him. He aimed the final explosive directly at the machine's core joint. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to acknowledge the danger, and then he threw. The explosion was immense. The war machine staggered violently, systems failing. Sparks, smoke, and fire erupted from its armor. The ground shook as it collapsed, unable to recover. For the first time, silence fell over the battlefield. The humans had won, not through superior technology, not through numbers, not through brute force, but through courage, ingenuity, and mastery of fear. Dravana exhaled slowly, tentacles trembling. She had expected the humans to fail. She had laughed at the legends. And yet here they were, victorious against a weapon designed to destroy them all. She watched the human warrior survey the battlefield. His squad gathered around him, battered but alive. He looked at them, ensuring everyone was accounted for. Injuries ignored, fatigue ignored, he checked their status calmly and methodically. No celebration, no boasting, only quiet responsibility. Dravana realized something profound. These humans were not reckless. They were not reckless heroes or mindless fighters. They were disciplined, brave, and intelligent. They faced fear, danger, and death and chose to act anyway. The coalition soldiers began to regroup, inspired by what they had witnessed. The humans had not just survived, they had led. They had turned despair into hope, chaos into strategy, and fear into a weapon. Dravana scribbled notes frantically. Her report would need to reflect a new reality. Humans were not weak, fragile, or easily defeated. They were unpredictable. They were dangerous. And they were capable of inspiring even the most advanced species to greatness. The human warrior gathered his squad. Injured but determined, he prepared for the next wave. The enemy would return, larger, stronger, and more prepared. But he would not retreat. He would not falter. He would face it head-on. and Dravana knew she would watch. She could no longer laugh at legends. She had witnessed the truth. Humans were warriors not because they were fearless, but because they chose to fight despite fear. She scribbled one final note before stepping back from the viewport. Human warriors, fear acknowledged, courage chosen, action inevitable. Any enemy underestimates them at their peril. The battle was far from over. But one truth had become undeniable. Humans were more than legends. They were a force no one could ignore. The battlefield was quiet now, but the silence was heavy. Smoke still curled into the sky from destroyed drones and scorched ground. The war machine lay in twisted ruins, its metallic frame broken and useless. Coalition forces were regrouping, wounded soldiers tending to each other, energy shields flickering back to life. And in the middle of it all stood the human warrior. His armor was battered, his face smeared with soot and blood. His breathing was heavy, his movements slow from exhaustion, yet his eyes were sharp and alert. He surveyed the battlefield calmly, ensuring that every member of his squad was accounted for. Dravana observed from orbit, unable to tear her gaze away. For hours, she had watched humans turn a near-impossible battle into a victory. She had seen them face overwhelming odds, fear, and death itself, and choose to act. They had survived not because of technology, not because of superior numbers, but because of will, courage, and intelligence. The humans were more than the legends she had laughed at. They were real, terrifyingly real. The human warrior moved among his squad, checking wounds, sharing quiet words of encouragement. Injuries ignored, fatigue ignored, he made sure each soldier was capable of moving, fighting, and surviving. There was no arrogance in his actions, no boasting. Only responsibility and a quiet understanding of what had been achieved. Dravana felt a strange mix of emotions. Respect, yes, but also awe. Humans had proven something fundamental. They were unpredictable, resourceful, and fearless in ways no algorithm or history could predict. Her communicator buzzed. Orders from the council demanded her final report. The old report she had drafted, mocking the human legends, was no longer valid. Every calculation, every prediction, every assumption she had made about humans was now wrong. She hesitated for a moment, looking at the battlefield. The human warrior was helping an injured alien soldier to his feet, then guiding him back to safety. It was not just bravery, it was leadership, strategy, and humanity in the purest sense. Dravana's tentacles moved over her data pad, deleting the old report. Then she began a new one. Every detail mattered. The human's ability to act under fear, to turn chaos into strategy, to protect others even at great risk. Every exploit, every clever move, every act of courage was recorded meticulously. When she finished, the report's title was simple but clear: Human Warriors, Extreme Threat When Provoked. The words carried weight. Humans were no longer just a minor species. They were a force that demanded respect. Any enemy who underestimated them would face consequences unimaginable. Back on the battlefield, the human warrior stood atop a ridge, looking at the remnants of the war machine. His squad gathered around him, exhausted, wounded, but alive. They looked at him with admiration and trust, not because of orders, but because of his actions, his courage, and his unwavering focus. He allowed himself a small pause, breathing in the smoky air. Victory had been won, but at a cost. The battlefield was littered with debris and the enemy could return at any time. Yet he did not despair. The humans had proven themselves. They had survived. They had won. Dravana's observation pod hovered silently above. She had studied countless battles, countless species, and countless legends, but she had never seen anything like this. The human's combination of fear, courage, intelligence, and adaptability was unprecedented. And then something unexpected happened. The human warrior looked up at the sky, directly at Dravana's pod. His eyes were calm, but there was a silent message in them. Observation had been noted. Respect had been earned. Dravana's tentacles froze. She realized that humans did not act for fame, for legend, or for recognition. They acted because it was necessary, because others depended on them, because they chose to face fear, danger, and death, and to act anyway. That choice, willful, deliberate, courageous, was what made humans terrifyingly effective. The coalition forces began to move forward, inspired by what they had witnessed. Alien soldiers who had doubted humans now looked at them with a mix of awe and respect. What they had dismissed as stories, fables, or exaggeration had been proven true in blood and fire. Dravana felt something unfamiliar, a sense of responsibility. Her role as observer was no longer passive. She could influence how the galaxy saw humans, how strategies were planned, and how legends were told. The report she submitted could change the balance of power. She tapped her console, sending the new report to the Council. The message was clear: humanity could not be underestimated. They were resourceful, brave, intelligent, and unpredictable. Any species ignoring them would do so at their peril. As the humans began treating their wounded and securing the battlefield, the human warrior allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. He had acted not because he wanted glory, but because it was necessary. His squad had survived because he had chosen to act, despite fear, despite exhaustion, despite overwhelming odds. Dravana watched him quietly. She had started this observation with mockery, laughter, and disbelief. Now she felt a deep, undeniable respect. Humans were not just survivors. They were teachers, warriors, and legends in the making. The galaxy would remember this battle, though most would not know the details. The stories would spread, whispered among species who had once dismissed humans as weak. And when they told these stories, they would speak of courage, ingenuity, and unshakable will, the qualities that made humans legendary. The human warrior gathered his squad. Injuries patched, spirits renewed, they prepared for the next challenge. The enemy might return stronger and more prepared, but they would be ready. Humans were always ready. Dravana recorded one final observation. Her voice, quiet and serious, echoed through the pod. The legends were true. Humans fight not because they are fearless, but because they choose to act. Any who underestimate them will learn, too late, that choice is more powerful than any weapon. As the sun set on the battlefield, casting long shadows over the broken war machine, the human warrior stood tall. His squad followed, tired but unbroken. They had survived, adapted, and triumphed. And through their actions, the legends of human warriors were no longer myths, they were reality. Dravana sat back in her chair, her mind racing. For centuries she had studied war, strategy, and combat. For centuries she had dismissed the stories of humans. But now she knew the truth. Humans were extraordinary, not because they were invincible, but because they faced fear, danger, and death, and chose to act anyway. The galaxy would change because of what she had seen. Tactics, alliances, and strategies would all be reconsidered. Legends would be rewritten in blood, courage, and intelligence. Humans had proven themselves, and no one could ignore them again. And the human warrior, he simply walked forward, leading his squad through the smoke and debris, ready for whatever came next. Because humans did not stop. Humans did not give up. Humans never retreated from what needed to be done. They were legends, real, living, and terrifyingly unstoppable.